is a bit utilitarian in that sense, that more people will benefit from the vaccine than will be harmed by it.
Of course, he goes full Marvel right away. Now, if I was to Thanos this, and I've done that from time to time, perhaps we might think about this in a different light. How many people are we going to save versus how many are we going to... I will remind you, Thanos was the villain of those movies. Ergo, vis-a-vis, is the vaccine safe? Okay, so I'm sure everyone heard about the news. YouTube cancels anti-vaxxers. You see this? Okay, let's start with Mr. Tim Pool and hear about this new form of censorship that is going to destroy the world.
This segment with a shout out to Ryan Long. He's a comedian. Many of you are probably familiar with him. He's hilarious. And he's got a new segment, a new bit, where he's an expert and says, trust the experts because the experts agree. And then when his friend comes in and says, I'm an expert and I've read the data and come to a slightly different opinion, the one expert starts beating the crap out of the expert who disagrees, because that's basically what happens. We have all these people in the mainstream media saying science is settled and the experts agree, even though the science changes often because that's what makes science science. And they say the experts agree, but there are plenty of doctors who do not agree. Certainly, I think there's a lot of crackpots, and I don't trust Dr. Fauci because he's flip-flopped back and forth. So who do you trust? Well, I always say this. Make sure you find an individual medical professional that you trust. And I think that's completely reasonable. If you've got an issue with politics, you don't trust someone, find a better doctor. But what we're getting now is a one-way street. You can go on social media and basically say anything so long as it fits the narrative. But if you question the narrative experts, you are banned. YouTube bans all anti-vaccine content, not just COVID-19 related. The New York Post reports. YouTube is banning several prominent anti-vaxxers from its site, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and will delete all content that suggests approved vaccines are harmful or don't work, the company said Wednesday. The online video platform, which is owned by Google, said in a blog post it is cracking down on content that falsely claims...
Can we start with the first call out? If you want to get the best medical information, find a better doctor or find a doctor. I think it's a huge problem for a lot of Americans, isn't it? Is a lack. Like, I'll tell you, as a Canadian with the public healthcare system, I don't have a personal family doctor. Like the majority of them are already taken. I can go to walk-in clinics whenever I want, and I can be seen by a doctor. But to have your own personal family doctor, like even that in Canada is a little bit of a privilege. In America, I imagine it's got to be hard. And if you find a doctor and it's not the one that's telling you exactly what you want to hear, is this kind of like the doctor equivalent of just move? Like, just find a doctor. What's wrong with you?
Vaccines can cause chronic health effects. It is also targeting content that includes misinformation on the contents of approved vaccines. The new ban applies to all vaccines, not just COVID-19. This is how you enact despotism. There are a lot of people who are anti-vax, and they believe a lot of things about vaccines that are not true. There are a lot of people who might exaggerate certain things about vaccines and create a false understanding or misinterpretation of it. You see, this is the game. I had Jack Murphy on the Timcast Style podcast a couple weeks ago. He's back tonight. This should be fun. We got Seamus Coughlin in town as well. It's going to be the Illinois boys. Make sure you go check out Timcast IRL on YouTube. And
what are you saying? You had a point there, and then you just skipped over to start doing self-promos. Yes, people do that. That's the problem. And they're convincing multiple people. And also, I'm not going to let Tim Pool off on this whole thing, or Joe Rogan, or just the whole ivermectin gang, all right? You are still responsible if your messaging is telling people, hey, by the way, I'm just asking questions. There's a lot of questions we should be asking. At the end of the day, do we really trust Big Pharma? I mean, isn't that supposed to be a popular sentiment on the left? And now all of a sudden the lefts are all cucks for Big Pharma? And what's up? There's a study that shows that there's one drug that happens to be helping people out in South and Central America. Suddenly, I'm not allowed to talk about it? Isn't that weird? Sounds strange. Also, why are we never allowed to bring up the fact that certain people have died? There's a person or two who have died from the vaccine. I mean, shouldn't that be allowed to be talked about? But we're being censored, you know? I'm just asking questions. Like, by doing that, you know exactly what the fuck you're up to. All of you do. Like, there's no such thing as like, hey, whoa, we just got censored, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've never once been anti-vax, all right? Even though this is a highly politicized, highly polarized subject that is really separating Americans down party lines. And I'm going on my show every single day and being like, hey, come on, bro, just asking questions, all right? Big beanie. Yeah, I mean Dennis Prager. Okay, so on the scale of like Tim Pool to Dennis Prager, there's obviously a lot of people in the middle. Dennis Prager is the one who's just straight up like, you have participated in death. If you have not recommended ivermectin to family and friends, you have participated in death.
In order to play sports, would have to get vaccinated. Jack does not believe the vaccine will hurt his son. His son will be fine. He just doesn't know if it's necessary. And the state is effectively mandating it, forcing him to go through it. It's a very difficult position to be in because you want your kid to thrive and to chase his passions. And the state is basically saying, oh, yeah, we got to do this thing. Here's the game. Okay, YouTube. I have a lot of people who are like, Tim, why are you a shill for vaccines? Guys, vaccines are awesome. Now, you want to talk about long-term health effects on mRNA stuff? Okay, we can have a conversation about that because that's currently in the process. The studies are currently undergoing. Though the FDA has approved the community vaccine, which is, as they say, interchangeable with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Talking about any medical issue in general, saying that you are not allowed to have opinions opposing this is the slippery slope. Am I supposed to come out and be like, this is a good thing because they're wrong? No. I do think they're wrong, by the way. I actually did an interview with people at the CDC. I've investigated this. And I think what you typically hear is, yes, we know there are adverse events. We have VAERS specifically because of this. Some people have severe adverse events. You got to talk to a medical professional you trust. And the hope.
There it is. There it is. See, the problem is that there are people who don't want to take vaccines because they're afraid, and justifiably so, right? They have been inundated by people like you, Tim Pool, who focus on the statistically smallest numbers. It's like 6 or 7 people have gotten blood clots in the last year. Why can't we talk about them? And you're like, okay, how many people died today from COVID? Was it over 2,000? I think it was over 2,000. Of those 2,000, how many are dying that are unvaccinated? 99.5%. That's the narrative you have to be talking about. Because people will fixate on those small, and this is not just Tim Pool, right? This was the vast majority of the media for a very long time because this shit sells. And it was happening in Canada, just like it was happening in Australia, just like it was happening all over the world, where you would see newspapers that were like, AstraZeneca blood clots are incredibly frightening and something that we should be talking about. And absolutely. And yes, you should be consulting, ideally, if you have the access to it, with a doctor or medical professional, because there are people who shouldn't be taking the vaccines for a handful of reasons. It could be because you have a pre-existing condition, could be because you're X amount of time into your pregnancy, whatever that is. Yes, ideally, you can have access to that. But if you hyper-focus on this and you do these segments and you make it seem very scary, then people who are otherwise completely healthy and are going to survive taking a vaccine, they might not take it now because they've seen the show. It's like, I don't know. I just don't want to roll the dice. I don't know. I heard the guy who wears that beanie on the YouTube say that it hasn't been tested, just like it's not FDA approved or something. It's rushed. Like, why did they rush? Do I really want to put in this experimental rushed vaccine into my body? Well, actually, the technology has been around for about a decade now. It's actually really ingenious how they were able to. No, I want to talk about that. All right, I want to talk more about the beanie.
Is a bit utilitarian in that sense that more people will benefit from the vaccine than will be harmed by it.
Of course, he goes full Marvel right away. Now, if I was to Thanos this, and I've done that from time to time, perhaps we might think about this in a different light. How many people are we going to save versus how many are going to... I will remind you, Thanos was the villain of those movies. Ergo, vis-a-vis, is the vaccine safe?
And the harm really is minuscule. You know, people like to go to the vaccine adverse event reporting system and they pull examples saying, see, this
Hey, Left Mom, thank you. Appreciate it.
proves it. And I'm like, guys, there are a lot of reports going into VAERS. I understand that, but we also have a mass nationwide vaccination event. My issue is with the authoritarianism. They will approach a normal, regular run-of-the-mill person and say, here's the data on vaccines. And when I look at it, I'm like, that's actually great. It's rather promising. Now, as to whether someone wants to get it is between them and their doctor and their health issues and their religious beliefs, and not me or the state or, even a private business within reason.
Yeah. And guess what? No one's forcing you to take it. You can keep doing whatever. There's no vaccine mandate, federal vaccine mandate that is going around yet.
Especially considering we would need to have a legislative process and public debate and long-term studies. But that's not for
probably an hour, could
right? What you choose to do with your body. We have people on the show all the time who are vaccinated. Our guests the other night were talking about how they got vaccinated. And I'm like, that's great. You do your thing, right? We're about freedom and individualism. The problem here is it's an exploit. When you go to a regular person who will be like, yeah, vaccines are cool. Then they say, see, shouldn't we have the ability to ban anyone who dare oppose our narrative? That's the problem. We're supposed to have free and open discourse. But when it comes to political issues surrounding the approved narrative, it is being destroyed. We're going to go back in time, my friends. This is one thing I've been warning about since the dawn of the censorship debate. There was a period where you had but 4 broadcast towers. I mean, maybe 5, whatever. But you had basically NBC, CBS, ABC, and these were the big channels. And opinion was filtered through them. Most people only heard what they were told on the TV. And often it was wrong. One of the greatest things the United States has going for it was decentralization. Why did our economy expand? Why was there so much innovation? Why did we become so powerful? Because we had big, open, empty spaces to try things, to experiment. Decentralized authority, but it's centralizing. So we eventually come to radio and then television, and then we start getting homogenized opinion. There are benefits, for sure.
Could you imagine trying to regurgitate this information to someone else? Like, talk to a family member and be like, yeah, so I learned today that apparently the success of the modern American economy has to do with decentralization, and it was because of that. But apparently there was only 4 sources of information back in the day simultaneously that only gave you mostly falsifiable information. That's what I learned today.
Unified public opinion, people marching behind the main narrative because it's the only thing they hear, and no one really having access to information to challenge it. But is that really the country that we want? Centralized propaganda distribution from the state, from state-approved sources? No. You see, the way I see it is, there's a lot of benefits to mass communication. But what we need is an ability to challenge mainstream narratives. And if the true narrative from the establishment is correct and effective, it should win out. If the ideas are bad, they should lose out. Shutting down people you disagree with without actually challenging their ideas does not prove, I'll quote Tyrion Lannister, Game of Thrones. When cutting out a man's tongue does not prove him wrong. It simply proves you fear what he might say. It's a brilliant quote.
It's a pretty cool. Okay, so we've had Marvel films and George R.R. Martin, and that's basically what you need to know about the upcoming Civil War and Deep State. I'm just going to fast forward a bit to see if he has any other salient information to pass on.
When it comes to the mRNA vaccine, someone comes to me with a religious, question about certain contents in the vaccine, or they state that they're waiting for long-term effects, or they want to know the risk to pregnancies. These are all things you can find on the CDC website. You don't come to me for advice. You go to them. And I'm like, shouldn't we be allowed to have these questions? No. You see, what YouTube wants to be a network. They don't want to be YouTube. They want to be UsTube. So perhaps, you see, they don't mind me because we agree. We agree on a lot of basic issues. Establishment narratives in a sense. Now, that being said, I absolutely do challenge the mainstream narratives all the time, and I rag on the media for lying all the time. And I suppose they find that decently acceptable. So for me, I'm not banned just yet. But to be real, there are certain topics.
Oh, that was a good little Porky Pig moment.
Yet, but to be real, there are certain topics like voter fraud debate that we need to have off of YouTube. Otherwise, they'd ban us for talking about it, or talking about things like ivermectin. Again, which I am not a proponent of. I've read a lot of this, and my fear is I feel like too many people might have a counter-dependent identity.
He talks so much. This is like 12 minutes so far, and has yet to make a single point. Like that, every time I watch Tim Pool, that's kind of what I land on. But like a lot of parts of this, I can understand if you were someone who's going to be really infuriated by vaccines or vaccine passports, or what you consider to be like the segregation of society based on these one condition. Like I can see why this would be like, ooh, interesting, neat. But then he will cover his bases. He's very smooth at that as well.
This is what they do. Eventually they'll say anyone who opposes the war, anybody who spreads misinformation about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Okay, so we've gone full slippery slope here. So like I was talking about yesterday, YouTube has made this decision. There's 2 things that can be simultaneously true at the same time. Thing number 1, yes, YouTube should stop complete anti-vax medical misinformation from being spread on their platform. If I had control over my decision making on YouTube and what goes on to there, I would vote for that. So that can be good. At the same time, this can also be true. We should not have corporations being the arbiters of free speech. For some reason, the free speech absolutists only take number 2. Both can be right. Like if every single one of you had a Democratic control vote right now, I'm sure you would vote in favor of saying, yes, I don't want anti-vax nonsense to be spread on these platforms. It's getting people sick. People are taking fucking horse paste. Things are looking pretty dire. There's a whole bunch of states in the United States right now that have just abysmal vaccination rates because they've all been fear-mongered through Fox News, through all these other things. Like, it's something that, like, if you owned the network, if you had control over it, you would probably put that decision forward. So you can talk about both. Both can be true. You could be a free speech absolutist and admit that you are being cucked in this case by a giant corporation if you give them the grounds to control what is or is not free speech. The two things can be the same thing. And now we have Tim Pool here, who's basically like, this is how it starts. It starts with the vaccines, and then after the vaccines, the next step is going to be, what? All of a sudden, we're being drafted, you know? All of a sudden, they're like, you have to believe in this war, and if you don't believe in this war, you're not a proper citizen. Well, guess what, motherfucker? That's manufacturing consent. That's the world we live in. It's getting worse. Yes, absolutely. But what the fuck does this have to do with vaccines? Like, are you actually being serious? The same person who's been promoting fucking civil war day in, day out? I just keep making money from it. And then I'm not sure if this video will get pulled, so I figured I'd take a quick look at it before it does. This is from Mr. Jimmy Dore. COVID surges amongst vaccinated in Israel. How could this have happened?
In Israel, ultra-vax Israel's crisis is a dire warning to America. Guess what? There is a massive surge in COVID-19 infections in Israel, despite being one of the most vaccinated countries on earth. In June, there were several days with 0 new COVID infections in Israel. The country launched its national vaccination campaign last.
I'd like to remind you, by the way, all these people probably would have been on the other side of, like, I don't know how long Jimmy Dore has videos on this. We could probably look it up afterwards. He's probably got videos mocking all the kind of like bougie San Francisco wine mums and socialites who are like, oh yeah, we're not going to vaccinate our children because we believe it could give them autism, so we're not going to do that. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, there's a massive outbreak in these old-timey diseases like measles. And do you know anything about that? Well, we're not entirely sure, but we use holistic medicine on our children, and once we clear the chakras, everything's going to be fine. They would have been at the front lines of being like, this is anti-scientific, this is horrible, it's going to get a whole bunch of kids sick and or die, how could you ever do this, right? Like, this has been so thoroughly debunked at this point, anti-vax hysteria, and yet the exact opposite when it comes to this. Because I know, I work for Big Pharma, that's why I'm here.
Last year, and is one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, with 80% of citizens above the age 12 fully inoculated. COVID, most Israelis thought had been defeated. Fast forward 2 months later, Israel reported 9,831 new diagnosis cases in one day, a hairbreadth away from the worst day figure ever recorded in the country, 10,000 at its peak during the third wave. More than 350 people have died of the disease in the first 3 weeks of August. In a Sunday press conference, the directors of 7 public hospitals announced that they could no longer admit any coronavirus patients. The principal cause of Israelis' current predicament are the dominance of the extremely infectious Delta variant, along with the worrisome decrease in vaccine efficacy after about 6 months. Israel vaccinated its population almost exclusively with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which received full FDA approval in the United States. But in early June, with citizens over the age of 60 almost completely vaccinated, Israel scientists began observing a rise in infections among the double vaccinated in order to keep the number of COVID deaths down.
So obviously, the first time I heard this story too, it seems very scary. And that's kind of the point, right? Jimmy Dore is bringing this up because he's trying to push this narrative. Well, like, well, were we not lied to by Big Pharma? I mean, they told us these vaccines were going to work, and now all of a sudden it's going to be this perpetual thing. We have to keep taking new vaccines and stuff like that. I'm going to explain
its
shortly.
vaccine green passports, granting them only to the triple vaccinated and limiting their validity to 6 months. So let's talk about this. So what, can you shed any light on what's happening? I thought if everybody got vaccinated, we could beat the virus, but that doesn't seem to be happening. Can you explain that at all?
Yeah, that was poor messaging from our health officials from the very beginning. It was that we said, take the vaccine and you could get your life back. But that's not how it works. We all knew that these antibodies were going to wane off. And the reason why is last year, when we were looking at patients that had COVID, natural immunity, and looked at their antibodies, a lot of them started, about 5-6 months after the infection. Many of them didn't have antibodies. Well, they started out with a high level. So when you look at natural immunity from...
So I think this is a Dr. Drew doctor, like one who frequently guest stars on Dr. Drew. I couldn't find a lot of information about him. He seemed to have a lot of Twitter posts about alternative methods of treating COVID. That long list that Joe Rogan put out. Like they've been pumping me with everything, he didn't get hydroxychloroquine, but he got that really, really difficult to obtain treatment that Donald Trump got. I haven't seen anything about ivermectin, unfortunately, so there's that part. Regeneron, yes, he's huge on Regeneron. He's one of the Regeneron people, which would be awesome if every single person was a multimillionaire and could afford it and had access to it. That would be great. That sounds fun. But anyways, the actual truth is not that they lied to you about the fact that everyone should be vaccinated. Turns out that is absolutely entirely true. You can learn lessons from from Israel. Israel did not receive 100% vaccination. And when they give you numbers, raw numbers like, hey, Israel is 86% vaccinated, that's not telling you the whole story. It's not telling you the demographics of who is and who isn't vaccinated. Typically, the people who aren't vaccinated are those who are going to be much, much lower in age. And those people who are much, much lower in age are also the people who frequently go out a little bit more. They party a lot more than the 80 plus crowd, for example. So you have very, very young populaces of, all the way from children up into early 20s, who are the people who are going to go out, socialize, and frequent and do stuff like that. Israel is only like 60% vaccinated, and people still pretend it's one of the most vaccinated places on earth. The COVID-19 Delta variant emerged and changed everything, although there is some debate about booster shots. Distributing a booster shot and tackling vaccine hesitancy seems to be needed to end the pandemic. A recent Israeli study shows that the booster shot is 86% effective in preventing infection amongst the older population. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention has also reported that while vaccines show declining effectiveness against infection in general, they still show strong protection against hospitalization despite the variant. One model for defeating COVID-19, Israel is now facing a new stage of the pandemic. It should be added that of these infections, the hospitalizations and the deaths, again, the people who are being hospitalized and or dying, overwhelmingly the people who still haven't been vaccinated. In March and August 2021, the Social Policy Institute at the Washington University of St. Louis and Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya launched 2 nationally representative surveys to understand vaccination trends in Israel. The second survey asked respondents' intention to get a third booster shot if available. Demographic and socioeconomic characteristics were significant predictors of vaccination behaviors in Israelis in March 2021, but less so in August in 2021. Throughout the pandemic, confidence in the COVID-19 vaccines is a major factor in vaccine hesitancy. Who are the unvaccinated Israelis? To understand who is vaccine hesitant, we investigated the demographic and socioeconomic correlates for vaccination in Israel. In March 2021, 61.5% of the 1,517 respondents answered that they had received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Notably, vaccination rates varied amongst demographic and socioeconomic characteristics. The logistic regression model estimates that males, 65.7%, older adults, Generation X, 71%, baby boomers, 83.4%, parents with one child, 66.8%, those with a bachelor's degree, 67.2%, those in higher income groups, 68.7%, the fifth quintile, 72.4%, and employed respondents, 64.5%, were more likely to get vaccinated than the average population. In contrast, those with young adult groups, i.e. millennials and Generation Z, 47.7%, Haredi Jews, 49.2%, Arab Israelis, 52.4%, and those in the lowest income quintile, 52.1%, were significantly less likely to be vaccinated. That is a receipt of vaccination dose for the function of Israelis' demographic and socioeconomic conditions. So, when you break it down, it's incredibly different and also so disingenuous to keep saying, but they're 86%. Like, you see this? You see these stats? 86.9%? And still they're getting sick. COVID hasn't been eradicated. What did they lie to us? They're fucking liars, all of them. They lied. Like, no, you're just misinterpreting data. You're taking this one big number, and now all of a sudden this number is nice and scary because it's like, whoa, 86% vaccinated, and yet COVID has not disappeared. Well, what about this invincibility juice? We were told. That sounds like Krusty the Clown. No, I sound like Jimmy Dore. All right, I'm very proud of that Jimmy Dore impersonation. It's the best on the internet. The World Health Organization describes 3 reasons for not getting vaccinated: convenience, complacency, confidence. Given that the COVID-19 vaccines are highly accessible in Israel, we assume that the latter 2, i.e. complacency and confidence, are the 2 driving factors for the vaccine hesitancy. That is, people who will not get vaccinated because they think they don't need it, or are concerned with the vaccine's effectiveness and or safety. Results from our survey suggest that the confidence was the key reason for not getting a vaccine. In March, more than half of those who did not get a vaccine cited concerns over vaccines' long-term safety. Also, more than a fourth of the unvaccinated believe the COVID-19 vaccines would not be effective. Surprisingly, substantial numbers of the respondents exhibited mistrust of the government, and pharmaceutical companies. There it is. Hey, you can hate pharmaceutical companies. Lord knows I do. You can talk about how pharmaceutical companies perpetually keep people sick in America, because guess what? They do. A lot of them, the big ones like Pfizer, they spend more money on their R&D, more money on advertising than they do on R&D. So they spend more money pushing their products on you than R&D. The opioid crisis, it's created in large part because pharmaceutical companies wanted to push their products on people. These products were highly addictive. Once people got a broken arm or a broken foot, it was very hard to stop taking opioids. Hence, they then needed them, and then they turned to street drugs, which would have a lot of fentanyl in them, and then you've got the entire crisis on its hands, right? I'm not a fan of Big Pharma. Big Pharma fucking sucks. I am a fan of the workers, the scientists, the people behind this technology, because it is, at the end of the day, pretty fucking poggies. It's very revolutionary that we have this mRNA technology that is able to have our bodies recognize the spike protein of this coronavirus. I'm not going to pretend and say that I understand how it works, but I do respect it, and the science and the stats speak for themselves. Because if someone is to tell me, hey, in America, right now, in the past 5 months, 99.5% of the people who have died from this disease don't have the vaccine, I would be like, okay, I want that, please. I want the vaccine. Yeah, the thing that's protecting everybody, apparently. Like that alone should just be like, oh. And then when you go back to people like Tim Pool, or again, Mr. Jimmy Dore. Oh, I guess he doesn't get to speak for the rest of it. Yeah, Mr. Jimmy Dore. And who are like, well, it's in Israel, apparently it's not working. Were the whole thing's a lie? Do they even work? Are they just trying to sell us more stuff? You know? Hey, Lance, why are communist jokes so dirty? It's because they have no class. I need a... Hey, do you like movies? Do you like Serfs? Do you want movies and Serfs watching the movies? So then come over to the new channels. It's the Serfs, the cinema. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Can you do the thing, that thumbs up and comment and all those things that help us out in the algorithm that controls every aspect of our lives? Also, if you happen to have a Facebook account, can you delete it? Like, just delete it. You should probably delete your Facebook account because it's not a great company. But hey, if you can't do that for whatever reason, I understand. And could you also go to facebook.com/thesurftimes then and give us a little like and a follow. We're just trying to push back against the fact that people like Ben Shapiro happen to dominate the platform entirely. And when everyone asks why do older generations believe the things they believe, one of the problems is the majority of them on social media use Facebook. So to counter that, we're just going to be on there too now. Also, if you happen to have a union or a worker co-op or even a leftist project, podcast, website, Zoom, MySpace, it doesn't matter. We will advertise it for free on this channel. All you got to do is go to weareserfs.com and use the forms that we got there, weareserfs.com. Thanks, everybody.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, may you shower us mortals with gifts from the heaven. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are your humble jesters, clowning around for your amusement. To our lord, Trevor R. and Alexander Thaler, we give you our thanks for this meager land for us to toil our seed. To our knights of the Round Table, Egbard Sealine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariana McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Ants Are Still Running the World, Coulter Smith, Tom Groh, Val 9000, Jenna Tal, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojak, Saren 42, Chronic de Hemphog, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our glasses and we salute you, our comrades.